It's the start of hour number 3. Welcome back, everybody, to Sports Talk. Steve Kaplowitz with you as we get ready for El Paso Chihuahuas baseball coming up here in just a little bit, broadcasting from Southwest University Park. We'll get back to your phone calls here in a moment, but right now we want to talk a little college football. That's right. You heard me. College football. Because with all the talk on the NBA Finals, Major League Baseball, the minor leagues with the Chihuahuas, it's good to know that whenever this guest appears on the show, you can start thinking about the college football season. I'm talking about the one, the only, Phil Steele, who's with us right now on our Village Inn hotline. Phil, first off, it's great to have you back on Sports Talk here in El Paso. And like I mentioned a moment ago, your voice means that we can now start thinking football again.
Yeah, it's right around the corner. And, I start working on the magazine the Sunday after Thanksgiving, put 6 months into it. The last page heads off to the press June 2nd. We're able to capture all the latest happenings in college football, everything that happened in the spring, and now the magazines are coming back. The truck just pulled up to our offices today. The magazines are out and available, and like you said, Steve, that means football season is not too far away.
When did you first decide that you wanted to, put out a yearly publication that previewed college football, gave everybody essentially the elements that you provide today in the book? When did this concept first develop for you?
It came back in, I'm going to say it was 1993, and I was preparing a book for myself each year. And it was laid out much like the magazine is, where I had everything at my fingertips on every team in the country. And somebody came up to me and said, why don't you try that as a magazine? And I'm like, well, I don't know. And it took for me about a year to get over it. And in 1995, I put out that first version. The first version came out in black and white. It was on newsprint. And believe it or not, Steve, only had about 200 pages in it, actually a little less than 200 pages. You find that hard to believe because now we're up to 352 pages. But, put that first one out in 1995. Very limited distribution, but the people that got their hands on the magazine back in 1995 bought it again the next year and bought it again the next year. We went to full color about 7 years later. Now we're up to 352 pages, and it's pretty much everywhere you go to get the magazine.
When you first did it back in 95, did you ever have the vision that it would turn into what it has today?
No, I looked at the Athlons, the Street and Smiths, the Sporting News, and the Lindy's, and we were just an off magazine, one of those that wasn't one of the mainstream magazines. Now I feel that the people in the know, people that have to have information, treat the Phil Steele magazine as the best college football preview out there. I know it's the most informative. It's been the most accurate, so it's got reasons to be there. But no, back in 1995, I did not know that we would be beating labels like Athlon and Lindy's.
Unreal. We're talking to Phil Steele right now. You can follow him on Twitter at PhilSteele042. That is at PhilSteele042 as we continue here on the program. Well, obviously, something that caught my attention, I guess this was a few months back, when you published your spring guide and you actually had strength of schedules for 2016. I noticed that, according to the rankings that you had, Utep ranked dead last at strength of schedule. And what that really means for El Paso football fans is if you tally up the wins and losses for the upcoming schedule, the Miners' opponents have the worst combined record, which really kind of leads you to believe that if things fall into place where they should and this UTEP team stays healthy, this could be the breakout season for Sean Kugler that we've been hoping for a while, Phil.
Yeah, Steve, there's not too many categories that you want to come up last in, but that's the one category you do. You take a look at a team like USC this year, who comes in number one in the country in toughest schedule, and oh my goodness, look at the slate they're playing. They have got in the non-conference slate, they're playing Notre Dame and they're playing Alabama in conference play. They not only play all the tough teams from the Pac-12 South, they draw the top three teams out of the North in Stanford, Oregon, and Washington. And, oh, by the way, the weakest game of their schedule, Utah State, a pretty good team, one that's going to be in a bowl game. That's the toughest schedule in the country. Now we go to the other end of the spectrum, and we go to UTEP. Yeah, Texas is on the schedule, yes, but when you look at most of the opponents, they fall into the winnable category, especially a team like Houston Baptist that's rolling in on November the 5th. And I'm bullish on Utep this year. When you look at this team, last year I thought a good portion of the chances of the season went out the door when Aaron Jones got injured. And a lot of folks around the country aren't familiar with Aaron Jones, but Aaron Jones is one of the best running backs out there. And I think losing him last year, we saw the top rusher for Utep, just 381 yards rushing, 3.7 yards per carry. That's going to be one of the most improved rush attacks in the country. They've got a veteran offensive line. I like the guards with Will Hernandez and John De La Rosa, Aaron Jones, and now he's got a good backup in Trayvon Hughes. At fullback, Darren LaFosa is one of the top fullbacks in the country. In fact, NFL guys are looking at him as well. I thought it was a big loss in the spring when Mark Leftwich went down, but I like what Coach Kugler did, bringing in Zach Greenlee from Fresno State, who was my number 48 rated quarterback out of high school. So I see UTEP's offense as much improved. Defensively, that linebacker core is one of the most veteran units in the country, as is the secondary. And I'll be honest with you, Steve, when I put together a magazine, I always put great care into my most improved list. The most improved list takes teams that had a losing record last year. 75% of the teams that make my most improved list go on to bowl eligibility the next year. UTEP's on this list as my number 8 most improved team in the country.
Wow. Phil Steele with us right now on our Village Inn hotline as we continue here on Sports Talk. I'm happy you mentioned Zach Greenlee for a minute, because when we heard the news that Leftwich was going to miss the season, there was some questions. How would Sean Kugler handle the quarterback position? Brand new offensive coordinator, Brent Peace, who's got a ton of experience and has been somebody that's been able to develop quarterbacks in the past. And then Greenlee's name comes around, and here's a classic example of somebody that was very highly thought of coming out of high school, but just never developed the way Fresno State thought he would. Meanwhile, you give Pease an opportunity to work with him for a couple of years, and this is the kind of guy that can easily be a difference maker when you're dealing with a program in CUSA.
Yeah, and the first thing you mentioned, you notice when you look at Zach Greenlee, is that strong arm. He can really get the ball down the field. And then you like his experience that he comes in with. Now, granted, he hasn't had overwhelming success as a starting quarterback, but just the mere fact that he's got 6 returning starts playing in the Mountain West Conference, that's pretty good. So you've got the experience, he's got the arm strength, and I think he's going to be a quarterback that steps in here and does well. And, you know, Ryan Metz last year didn't have a great season. 6 touchdown passes, 7 interceptions, but that was as a freshman. Now he's got experience, and I think when you look at Metz, if he's called upon, he'll be an improved Metz over what he was last year, which was just a redshirt freshman getting his first action. So I think the quarterback position is one that's really going to be firmed up for UTEP this year with the addition of Greenlee and the experience of Metz.
Again, the question is, and you mentioned Texas, and we'll talk about the Longhorns and the Big 12 here in a moment, but Conference USA has been known to have some good football teams, but usually, Phil, it's on the other side of the conference. And the conference, in terms of the Western Division, has been wide open these last couple of years. It almost seems like if the Miners can live up to your prophecy and become the number 8 most improved football team in the nation, they'll have a shot at not only going to a bowl, but contending for a Western Division championship.
And I'm going to agree with that. And the one thing that UTEP's really got going in their favor is probably the 3 best teams in CUSA, and this plays into that number 128 schedule, are Marshall, Middle Tennessee, and Western Kentucky. You look at those 3 teams, probably the most talented of any team in CUSA. Now look at the UTEP schedule. They're the only team in the West that doesn't have to face any of those 3 teams. So the schedule sets up beautifully in that respect. If you're looking to contend in the CUSA West, I'm going to circle on my calendar September 24th. That's when they host Southern Miss. Southern Miss is a team that, if you look at my stock market indicator, which usually takes teams that went up awful high last year, they usually come down a little bit. They went from 1-7 in CUSA to 7-1 last year. While they are very experienced, I think that's a game that UTEP needs to win. And we saw with UTEP 2 years ago when Aaron Jones was healthy, if they could establish the run game, that's when they were at their best. And I think they would have the potential to establish a run game against Southern Miss. So that's a big toss-up game. They do have to play Rice on the road. They do have to play Florida Atlantic on the road. So the schedule's not, super, super easy, but it still is the easiest in the country. And I think avoiding those 3 teams out of the East comes into a great situation.
Does playing Texas early in the season, September 10th, really go to UTEP's favor? And maybe will it take the Longhorns, in your mind, a little longer to really gel and put together that kind of season that I know Longhorn fans are more accustomed to as opposed to what we've seen the last couple of years?
I am not giving Utep a great chance of beating Texas this year. I talked about the most improved list. I've got Utep number 8. I've got Texas number 1. So they are a team that, they've got a new quarterback this year, Sean Burchell. Stepped in the spring game. He's a true freshman. Really has a good development of that offense. Granted, he is a true freshman, but he's playing the game at home. He's playing against Utep. I think he'll have a good game. And they still maintain Tyrone Swoops at quarterback. He's a guy that runs the 18-wheeler package. He's 6'4", 254 pounds. He'll get you those tough short yards. They've got 2 running backs. They're both about 250 pounds. Chris Warren III and Donta Foreman. They've got a veteran receiving core, veteran offensive line. And probably the area they match up best with against UTEP is, as we saw in the bowl season, when UTEP struggled a little to run the football, that's when their offense struggled. Well, Texas last year, while they allowed 4.5 yards per carry, I look at their front 7 this year with Malik Jefferson, Nashawn Hughes, Poona Ford, Paul Boyette. I mean, they got some 315-pounders in the middle of the defensive line. I think they're going to be a lot tougher against the run. It's going to be tough for UTEP to establish that. Plus, it's just the second game of the season, and it's the first road trip for the UTEP team. So add it all up, I like Texas to win that game. I like UTEP to have a very good season.
Meanwhile, I'm looking at your Texas cover right now, and you've got Greg Ward from Houston profiled, Malik Jefferson from Texas, Seth Russell from Baylor, and then Myles Garrett from Texas A&M. So there is your Texas cover that we should be seeing a lot here. If you want to order an out-of-town cover, folks, you can go to philsteele.com and essentially pick the cover you want, because, Phil, one of the things I love about the issue is if you're a transplant but you still like the regional covers from other parts of the country, you can get those as well by going on the website.
Yeah, and everybody's got their favorite team, and you don't get any different information. It's still 352 pages, and it'll take you most of the summer to actually read the entire magazine. But you can get it with your favorite player on the front, and that makes it a lot more enjoyable. Now, the magazine hits the newsstands on June the 28th, but you can actually get it through our offices if you go to the website, philsteele.com, or you call us direct at 866-918-7711. That's 866-918-7711. Our offices are closed tonight, but to be open in the morning. The truck got here today, so we're able to ship the magazines out today. You'll have it in your hands a full 10 days ahead of when it hits the newsstands, and you can pick your favorite cover, and we'll put the favorite covers up there on philsteele.com first thing in the morning.
As far as Baylor goes, with the story that came out and now knowing Art Briles is going to be suspended, perhaps fired, perhaps missing a year, depending on how that develops in time, how much does that influence your projection in the magazine with the Baylor Bears?
And we're fortunate with the magazine. When I talk to the coaches, they always say they have their exit interviews during the course of May. That's when you find out about a lot of the transfers in May. A lot of kids are unhappy with where they're at. Second or third string and opt to transfer. We're able to capture that by going to the press on June the 2nd. And if you flip to the Phil Steele page for Baylor, you'll see the head coach is Jim Grobe. I bet you we're the only magazine out there that's got that correct this year. But I think it's huge. When I originally did the magazine, and back in the magazine process, I would say April, I had Baylor a potential top 10 team. I had Baylor second in the Big 12. Then the news hit in May, fortunately, before the magazine came out. There are 7 freshmen that were supposed to come in that are not going to be enrolling at Baylor. One of them was even there in the spring. He's going to be leaving the school, asking for his release. There's a couple of JUCOs, one on the offensive line, one on the defensive line, projected as starters that aren't going to be able to make it. They still have talent. They still got guys like Seth Russell and Jared Stidham at QB, Shock Linwood, Johnny Jefferson at running back, and a good talent throughout. But I dropped them down from second to third in the Big 12, and I took them completely out of the top 10 and put them down towards the bottom of the top 20 this year. So I think it's going to have a major impact.
Meanwhile, throughout the rest of the Big 12, we've talked about Texas, we've touched on Baylor. Who are some of the other teams you like? You got to have, obviously, Oklahoma in the mix.
Yeah, and Oklahoma probably has the best path to get to the playoffs this year. When you look at them, the fact that Baylor was their main contender, and now Baylor, of course, has some problems. You got to think Oklahoma is going to be favored in that game. They do have to play TCU on the road and Texas on the road, but they're a veteran squad with 13 returning starters. I see Oklahoma as a team that's going to be favored in all 12 games this year, and of the national teams out there, they probably have the clearest path to make the playoffs.
Wow. Okay. Anybody else in the Big 12 you want to touch on before we move on?
I'm going to throw out TCU. And, with TCU, just 2 years ago, they were coming off a 4-8 season, ended up going 12-1, nearly made it to the national title game. Last year, they were inexperienced on defense, only had 5 returning starters. And Gary Patterson always puts together a solid defense, but they allowed 398 yards last year due to that inexperience. This year, they got 8 starters back on defense. And offensively, they lose some key players. But I go back to 2 years ago when they installed this new offense. Trevon Boykin was a quarterback, but they were sort of hoping to move him to receiver, hoping they can get a transfer to come in and take over at QB. Boykin had a great year. I think Kenny Hill can step in and have equally as good a year as Boykin had 2 years ago. He's a guy that's got experience at Texas A&M. They got good running backs with Kyle Hicks and Sean Nixon. And I think TCU's offense is going to be better than expected. I think they're going to be the main contender to Oklahoma in that Big 12 race.
We've got some listeners in Las Cruces who obviously follow New Mexico State football year after year. It is such a tough battle for that team. They have their money games. They play in the Sun Belt, at least for the time being, before they're looking at another conference or going independent. You look at what Doug Martin was able to do in the last few games of last season when they were making progress. Can that carry over, not necessarily in the non-conference schedule this season, Phil, but also when they get to Sun Belt games?
I think it can. I think you're going to see an improved New Mexico State on the field. As long as that guy in the backfield, Larry Rose, number 3, stays healthy. If he stays healthy, they've got a chance on offense. And they bring in a player like Tyler Matthews. Now, Tyler Matthews, we just talked about TCU. He was at TCU, then he transferred last year, had a sit. Now he's landed at New Mexico State. He was the number 13 rated quarterback coming out of high school. He's got the potential to star there. And Doug Martin said it was his best receiving corps he has put on the field in his coaching career this year. So they're going to be good on the offensive side of the ball. And defensively, they got a lot of players back. Now, the one thing I don't like about New Mexico State is their schedule. As you touched on, the non-conference slate is tough, but also in-conference play, they're hosting teams like Appalachian State and Georgia Southern. Now, that means that a lot of their winnable games are going to be on the road this year. They did win a couple of games last year, and how about that? A 3-game win streak last year for New Mexico State. That's something you don't see very often. I think they'll be an improved team this year, and they'll flirt with a bowl, but they didn't make my most improved list, so I didn't call for a bowl this year.
Phil Steele's projected AP preseason top 10. Alabama, Clemson, Oklahoma, Florida State, LSU, Ohio State, Michigan, Stanford, Tennessee, Notre Dame. If there is a school that we have not touched on yet, but give me a surprise that's going to sneak up there this year in your mind, as well as a disappointment, a school that everybody's expecting to be right there, but is going to have a tougher time than people would expect.
For the surprise team, I'm going to go with Washington. And Washington's just coming off a 7-6 season. In fact, they had to win their last 3 games just to get to a winning record last year. But I think they could actually enter in, much like TCU did a couple years ago, enter into the potential playoff mix. When you look at them, they had the best defense in the Pac-12 last year, despite returning just 4 starters on defense. This year they got 7 starters back on D. A lot of folks have never heard of them, but Azim Victor might be one of the best linebackers in the Pac-12. Good talent throughout. That secondary is loaded with Budda Baker, Sidney Jones, Kevin King. And offensively last year, they had a true freshman quarterback in Jake Browning. And Browning now has experience. They've got Myles Gaskin at running back. He was a true freshman last year, rushed for 1,302 yards. He's back. John Ross, their playmaker, they could go to the distance anytime he touches the ball. He missed all of last year with injury. He's back. And in the North, they get some key games at home, like USC, Arizona State, Stanford. So they're a team that's got the potential to get to that double-digit wins, contend for the Pac-12 title this year. As far as a disappointing team goes, I'm going to not say disappointing based on the season, because they could very well get to double-digit wins, but maybe just a little bit of their fans' expectations, and that's Michigan. Michigan, everybody is very high on this year. They finished off the season great. They beat Florida, the SEC East champ, 41-7 in the bowl game. They've got 14 returning starters, and this comment I'm making right now is going to seem pretty silly on October the 28th, because they're going to be 7-0, and they're going to be extremely hot, and they're going to probably be in the top 4 or 5 in the country. But what I don't like about Michigan is their final 5 games. They have to play Michigan State, Iowa, and Ohio State all on the road. I think they drop 1 or 2 of those games, and a lot of Michigan fans are thinking national title, Big Ten championship. I didn't call for them to win the Big Ten championship, meaning I'm not calling for the national title. So I think just Michigan fans might be a little disappointed at not reaching their level of expectation right now.
Again, philsteele.com. You can order online. You can check out the website. There's so much stuff. And if you really are in love with the college football preview, which if you've never seen it, you're going to be. I do want to mention you've got a pro football edition as well, Phil. You do a fantasy football guide as well as a pro preview. It's not as many pages as the college book, understandable, because not as many teams. But I'm sure that as far as the analysis goes, you pack it all into the pro book just like you would the college book.
That's right. We're working on it right now, Steve, and the advantage is if you like the 2 full pages we give you on the college teams, we give you 4 full pages on the NFL. And you said fantasy book and NFL book. It's 2 books in one. You get the fantasy book in the back, and you get the NFL book in the front. 4 full pages on the NFL. Now, that one will probably finish in a couple of weeks and then send it off to the press. So we're probably still a good 3-4 weeks out from actually getting that one back from the press. But if you do want to order it, once again, you go to philsteele.com. That's STEELE.com, and you can order the Pro Magazine up there right now.
Follow Phil on Twitter, at PhilSteele042. That's at PhilSteele042. Great job, as always, Phil. We appreciate the time, and, man, you got me excited now. Can't wait for the first kickoff of the college football season.
Sounds good. And you know what, Steve? I look forward to our yearly conversations. Always enjoy hearing your voice. Thanks for having me on today.
You as well. From Phil Steele, right back to your phone calls, 880-5763. Stay with us. It's Sports Talk from Southwest University Park and the West Star Bank Club, getting ready for the El Paso Chihuahuas and the Albuquerque Isotopes, coming up at 7 o'clock on 600 ESPN El Paso.